We have an inside logistical, yeah.
Is the one that I brought also to the lecture. Yeah. So your question was, how does non-duality apply to daily life in general, right? Like, does it apply?
Can it be practical in any way?
Yeah, can it be practical in any way? And then you were mentioning that there's a guy who tries to kind of disassociate and say, I'm not really here, and I'm one with this, and then all this kind of stuff.
And it's just happening through me, and I'm just experiencing what's happening. Not even experiencing what's happening. It's just happening.
It's just happening.
There's no one there. It's just happening.
Yeah. So that what you described is actually a mental game that guy is playing with himself, because non-duality is an insight that's realized, and once it's there, you don't have to do anything with the mind to guide it and tell it that there's no one there or that this is not really happening, right? So the ego is very tricky. It will take and actually this is a funny quip. I was going back and forth with a friend of mine yesterday and the day before, because he is a super smart guy, and he creates mental models of everything. And I can't get through to him because of that. And I shared a couple of really cool videos with him, not from me, but from this channel called Samaneri Hayasara, which is amazing, by the way. She has great classics of spirituality read with a beautiful voice and sound and stuff. And I sent it to him, and he immediately twisted it into something else, right? And I said to him, you have an almost infinite capacity to downgrade wisdom into intelligence, which is exactly what the mind does, right? Like the mind has an infinite capacity to pervert what would be an insight of non-duality and bring it down to a level of tactical, intelligent, smart. What do I do with this type of thing, right? So what you want to notice is that all these attempts at being practical and using non-duality are from the egoic mind. And they are an attempt to make your life better and happier and all that stuff, which is good, but non-duality won't serve that purpose, because when you do it like that, there's a self trying to do it. In other words, whether that self is an active self that thinks and does, or whether it tries to remain as the witness, there's still a sense of separateness there. So it's not non-dual. And it is like a caricature of non-duality, it's the egoic mind trying to enact its facsimile of non-duality and trying to use it. Now, when the insight of non-duality arises, which is a kind of, is what we were talking about earlier, it's a merger, I think it's a synaptic neural merging that happens, which gives rise to the mind working in a different way. And then the egoic mind makes an interpretation and calls it non-dual, but that interpretation is after the fact. Then non-duality has realized itself, and you conduct yourself from that insight, as opposed to being dual and trying to take the idea of non-duality and applying it in a dual context, because that it doesn't work that way. Does that make sense?
That answers the question, but the next question is like how, because a lot of people are almost attracted by trying to achieve that non-dual state.
Yes.
And then if you think of this as if I would achieve that state at work, for example, would it have any practical advantages, or would it help me to be more coherent or make better decisions, or just go with the flow? Is there any kind of what's so attractive there?
Yeah, right. Got it.
That's the question. Yeah.
Okay, got it. So from that angle, what you could imagine is it's like a bodybuilder, say, or a cyclist, or any sports. Let's take a bodybuilder for being the more obvious example. Now, a bodybuilder doesn't have to, once you're built, whether you're flexing your muscles or not, they're there, right? So everything you do carries that intrinsic power already within the action. You see, so once the non-dual realization has been established and stabilized, it's what you are. So it's not what you do with it. That's one element, right? So it's not how do you then use it, because it's where you're coming from. Okay, and the benefit of it is that in the dual state there is a versus. There's a contentious relationship with the world and with your own thoughts and mental introjects, because there appears to be a self that needs to be protected and preserved and made happy and made to survive. And that self then splits the world into three things. One, irrelevant things that it doesn't even look at. And then pleasant things worth chasing and unpleasant things worth pushing away. And it's pushing and pulling on reality all the time in a way that creates a huge amount of friction. Mm-hmm. It's just pure friction, right? So mm-hmm. duality creates a antagonistic relationship within the mind. Mm-hmm. And so to the earlier point, everything is arising in mind, but the mind has the capacity to seemingly split itself. Mm-hmm. And by that seeming split, the different parts of the mind that don't recognize each other enter into a contentious relationship, sometimes mm-hmm. creating temporary truces like falling in love, only to mm-hmm. 2 years later be fighting like cats and dogs with your partner, or be disappointed or disenchanted, or bored, right? Mm-hmm. Or down to like pure practicality, but there's nothing here to obtain anymore, you see? Mm-hmm. So the elimination or the collapse of the dual state of the mind brings the different parts of the mind into a harmonious, just joint type of operation. Yeah. Mm.
So it could be seen as some sort of perspective that you apply. You don't even apply because you're already coming from that perspective.
You got it.
So if a conflict happens within a workplace, for example, you could see, you understand what's happening on a kind of almost different level.
Absolutely.
You don't get into this personally, or that part of the brain that's like ego, defined as ego, doesn't jump in right away, because you see both or three parts of it at the same time, and you can kind of almost decide either you embody one of them or you don't even engage.
Well, I think decision goes out the window in the way that the ego believes decision is happening, right? So decision, in a sense, is a bit of an illusion. It's a good practical illusion. Let's call it like that, right? So it's not. It certainly feels like we hold responsibility and we make decision, but the underlying factors that lead to a decision are typically subconscious, and when the non-dual state is stabilized, the decision is made for you, but is made taking all the factors into account already, because there's no separation there, and nothing has been suppressed down to the subconscious. You understand? So there's nothing to defend in that sense. And I had another passing thought about it, but it might come to me later. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's more like you're talking about wholesomeness quite often as well. So it feels like from that state, you're more aware of why this decision or where you acted in a certain way. You're more kind of aware what are the reasons for taking this decision, versus if you're identified with ego, you just snapping sometimes, or you just like I had something yesterday when I just snapped over my partner, which was stupid, but like I was just so much into the ego kind of that I didn't realize this is coming up. I felt some sort of weird thing, and then it just like it was subconscious, but then because I wasn't probably not in this more wholesome state, I couldn't identify it. So it's like, oh, watch out, there's something bubbling, and if you don't watch out, it's gonna at some point snap, and it did.
Yeah, exactly. So the non-dual state, again, and I'm speaking of it having touched it, and I touch it often, but I haven't stabilized in the non-dual state, and there's also degrees to it. There's some very extreme degrees of the non-dual state in which you are so merged with the content of consciousness that there's really no distinction whatsoever, right? Like the duality has completely collapsed, and it almost becomes difficult to navigate physical reality because you're not distinct from it in any kind of perceptive way. You understand? But it's almost impossible to ask the right question about this, right? So you've noticed it's not that I'm avoiding your questions, but it's a reframing in the sense that in the non-dual state, that which makes decisions is not present as an entity. Decisions are being made on the basis of all information being kind of available. I remember what I was going to say. So we're talking about wholesomeness and harmony, right? Now, think of it this way. If you start with your mind acting as a committee, let's say that you have a committee of 10 people. Yeah. And that committee, like any other committee, is based on conversation and agreement and disagreement. So there's going to be a lot of friction. Sometimes there's going to be a lot of shouting. Like, your snapping is a great example of that. You snapped at one of your own mental interjects, which you don't recognize yet, right? So language is a very clunky vehicle. It has duality already implicitly in there, and people fight with each other, and they try to come up with kind of compromises and sort of semi-understanding of things. Now, say that these guys say, you know what? We need to learn how to collaborate better, and to do it, instead of learning how to share ideas better or listen better to each other, what we're going to do is we're going to start singing, and we're going to become a choir. So we're just going to sing. We're going to forget about this whole business of, agreement and disagreement, and we're simply going to make sure that we're in tune with one another, regardless of what we're saying. Yeah. And so they start to sing, and they start to hit these amazing harmonies, these 10 people. So your question about what do I do with non-duality is equally to saying, well, now that we've created these beautiful harmonies, what do we do with them? Right? You see what I mean? So, well, they are their own thing in some sense, right? Like there's nothing left to be fixed once you've tapped into the ability to do that and to harmonize with all the aspects of the mind. Then that's its own goal in some sense. Because now the committee learned to collaborate in a harmonious way, and things get done. Let's put it like that. And of course, the mind could ask, well, okay, how do they then go back and make right decisions and the rest of it? But let's take the analogy for what it's worth, right? Like, so the non-duality would be the capacity to create harmonies in the mind by eliminating all the friction between the different elements. Yeah.
But there's also a way. So would you equate it with a blissful state of mind, or is it two different things? Because I know that some people, I heard this term, which I really liked, hacking the reward function. So if you, for example, long-time meditator, like you could actually practice the way to be in a blissful state and disregard anything else.
Yeah.
So it's like, imagine eating chocolate, right? Or like drinking coffee gets you into this kind of high level of cognition.
Yeah.
And I guess it's short term because it will wear off at some point. But if you could, some people would say you go to a monastery, right? And you practice, you meditate 24 hours a day. And then you can develop this blissful state that you have this, and then you almost like you remove yourself from society because you're not functioning on the same level as people, right? And you created this kind of bubble.
Yeah.
But this is also a form of escape, right? Because the kind of
you got it.
The interesting part is like, okay, how do you live here in this society without escaping? We develop some sort of framework or frame of mind, as you said. Like we kind of we approach things in a kind of skillful way that would be harmonious with ourselves and the environment, right? So I think, and this is missing from society, I guess, today, like largely. With what happens to nature and people fighting in wars and destroying nature and things like that. So
that's a good one. Well, so to that one, I think you're spot on, right? So what you've gone from is trying to get your highs from external elements to learning how to produce them in your own mind. But being kind of bound by the need to be in bliss, right? So that's a classic. It's not a bad stage, right? Like when you can create bliss on demand. Well, how cool, I would say, right? I've never, I've certainly experienced it, but I don't create it on demand, and it's a very slippery path as well, because then you are. Yeah, it's almost like, well, the ego gets into meditation for its benefits, right? How will it benefit me is the operative question of the ego at the end of the day. And you see how, again, talking about how we twist things into lower levels, we twist wisdom into cleverness. it's this entire industry of the benefits of meditation, right? Oh, it lowers your blood pressure. It's like, you know, what a way to downgrade, you know, the one tool that could take you to the primordial essence of reality, and make it into the benefit of lower blood pressure. It's just like, you know, and you can list those benefits out, and then people get like, okay, well, I'm gonna meditate because it calms me down and all this kind of business. It's just such, you know, it's very low level basic stuff, and you got to start somewhere for sure. And you definitely got to feed the monkey, right? Like you got to give the ego some candy so that it, you know, has even a reason to begin. And God knows that we all needed, you know, some basic reason or not to begin, but it's definitely not what it's about.
But the question is, how could you make that primordial state interesting for people? Because it seems like for my like my conversations with regular people, they don't seem to be remotely interested in this at all. Like for them, it's the benefits you're talking about, like lowering blood pressure, being happier, you know, having a, you know, better time at work, whatever, and they're not interested in this like metaphysical kind of realm of, you know, of unifying with the kind of absolute or one. And for me, this was the kind of more interesting one. It's the practical things. I guess I'm drawing on the personal things too, but yeah, like what's that for you? Like that primordial, like what's the promise there? You know, or what's the kind of or why do you feel drawn to this?
What do I feel like personally? You mean?
Yeah.
I suppose is just pure dissatisfaction and feeling out of place, right? Having chased and often obtained that which was supposed to make me happy and seeing it not work, and then losing it and being even more miserable about it, right? And there is a all right, let's go into the Matrix as we often do, right?
I love the Matrix.
So when Neo meets Morpheus and they sit for the first time in that living room where he gets offered the red and the blue pill, he says that there's a question that has been driving you, and it's like a splinter in your mind, he says, right? And that's what it feels like. It feels like, wait a second, something's off. I don't know what it is. I don't know what it is. I keep trying to, you know, I try to obtain it in sports. I try to obtain it in romance. I try to obtain it in finance. I try to obtain it in poetry and art, right? And do-goodery, you know, what would you call it? A charity or whatever you want to call, gratitude journaling, all this kind of nonsense, and nothing works, right? So what the hell is it, right? Am I cursed? Was I born broken? Or, you know, it almost feels like you were born as a kind of that you were born in a way that was cut off from the source of joy. That's kind of the best way I can describe it. And I'm like, this is just horrible. And sometimes it's you can make it subside and entertain yourself in but the looming loneliness and the silence and the thing is always one step behind you. It's almost like you need to constantly escape from it lest it catches you, right? And there comes a point where you go like, you know what? Let's just let this damn thing catch me and see what it's all about. And then when you let it catch you, lo and behold, you come into a reality that you could have never imagined. And I have to say, in my case, also psychedelics opened that door. And once you have seen the nature of mind, it's almost like looking at the other side of the mirror. And you go, oh, right. Okay, that's what it was about. Oh, Jesus, how could I? And then you descend back and you're like, no, I don't want to descend back to this crude nonsense, right? Like, just let me back in. And the way back in, of course, is to clean your entire system out, which is why I like neurology and all that stuff that I tried to share. Yeah, does that make sense? Because once you've touched it, it's utterly compelling. Nothing else will do it for you because you know what it's about.
It does, and I think with psychedelics, I had states where it was just too open and too free, and it was interesting in the first few hours. But then it was like it was just too broad, too undefined. That it was like, it's just enough. I just want to be in a more concrete reality when everything kind of has place, right? So it's like it feels like we always want the kind of opposite to what we have, but it's great, obviously, to experience to see that thing. But on the monkey in the implementation, like being in the monkey suit or being implemented here currently. It makes more sense, but I totally agree. Like, it makes more sense to be here with cleaned engine and clean vehicle, right? So it's
Completely.
because if it's not, then there's no point. You're going to be struggling. And if you manage to clean it, then it makes sense. You go through it still because it might be interesting, right? And then you're open for all the surprises and unexpected
Absolutely.
things.
Curiosity. Yeah, I mentioned pain as one of the bigger elements that drives me, but curiosity is definitely the other one. I really wanted to know, you know, like I really, really wanted to know what the hell is up. How can you go through life, you know, being all functional and busy and not know what the game is about? Like, what the hell? Right? Like, to me, that's incomprehensible. I cannot. And actually, back to psychedelics, there's one interesting element to it, or two. You mentioned one, which is after a while, then the mind begins to ask, okay, is this it? And now is it all like up for grabs and I have nothing to hold on to? And so that in itself is a little identity and a little sense of self trying to grasp, right? That's interesting. And the other one is that very often psychedelics, as with everything else, can be perverted in its use, in the sense that if you use the psychedelic to go outward into experience, you'll get lost in it in a very sort of shamanistic kind of way. Remember, we were talking earlier about how the shaman gets lost in the archetypal realm, right? It's kind of like a Terence McKenna type of thing. But if you use the psychedelic state to examine the nature of mind, in other words, you go inward with the psychedelic, that's a completely different thing. And I don't hear anybody talking about that, by the way. Maybe they are, right? I don't want to like suddenly be. I didn't invent this, but the way you use the psychedelic has everything to do with whether it is a vehicle for self-realization or whether you get lost in la la land of visuals and archetypal imagery and all this kind of stuff. It's all important to notice that difference.
I think they do. There's this research on psychedelics in Hopkins Institute. I think it was, you probably heard about this psychedelics-induced therapies, right? So helps people to break up with their addictions and things like that. So I think that's one aspect of that.
There's people definitely examining it, but the question is, are these people who are familiar with the methods of self-inquiry and the examination of the nature of the mind by the mind itself, right? Are these people really acquainted with this, and do they have a degree of even maybe non-dual realization themselves? Because otherwise there's no way that a person without this can guide that exploration properly. There's simply no way. It's almost like a psychologist trying to talk about, you know, emptiness and non-duality or whatever, right? They'll just turn it into a concept as opposed to knowing what's the operative way to guide the exploration.